what's going on, y'all? So here I go again, coming to you with the facts. Nothing more and nothing less, just the facts. And we're going to talk about the MuteRkelly movement, and we're going to ask ourselves whether or not that movement is an illegal movement. But essentially, we're talking about law, and we're talking about common law, which is something that has been established by the courts. Now, before we even go further, I'm just going to go ahead and read some of an article that I actually found, right? So it basically says that protesters gather outside of Sony office to demand label drop R. Kelly, right? And then it goes on, protesters gather in front of Sony Music's headquarters in New York City on Wednesday to demand the label drop the singer R. Kelly amid many sexual misconduct allegations against him. The Lifetime docuseries Surviving R. Kelly has renewed favor for muting Kelly and finding justice for his alleged victims. The MuteRkelly hashtag has taken over social media. Protests have been held outside his concerts, and streaming services and radio stations have pledged to no longer play his music. So right here, you should take note that they're you should take note that they're protesting outside of Sony headquarters, and then they're also getting several radio stations and streaming services to stop playing music. Now, my belief is that when a radio plays your music or when a streaming service streams your music, you're going to get residual income. That's my understanding of that. You guys let me know, comments below, and let me know how that works. But from my understanding is that you get residual income every time someone streams your music or someone plays your music. If your song is heard on YouTube, then you're going to get some type of residual income from that, especially a platform like YouTube, because YouTube has a business model where as if a commercial is played, the creator, the content creator, gets the funds from that commercial, right? So we should take note of this. We should take note of this, right? So let's just go ahead and continue on. It says Sony Music, through its label RCA Records, has Kelly among its artists. So organizers behind MuteRkelly, Black Women's Blueprint, Care 2, Color of Change, and Credo Action, Girls of Gender Equality or Gender Equity, now in New York City, and Ultraviolent, went to the company's New York City office to present it with a Record Label of Shame award and asked it drop R. Kelly. So these protesters are going to RCA, which is a subsidiary of Sony, and they're asking them to drop R. Kelly, right? Additionally, the organizers delivered a petition signed by more than 217,000 people demanding RCA Records drop Kelly, right? So here is an image of this alleged protest. When you click on this image, this is what you see. I'm just going to go ahead and enlarge it. So you can see that, you have these protesters out being organized, and they're coming out to mute R. Kelly. And you can see they're in front of the Sony building, and they're trying to force Sony to essentially drop R. Kelly from their subsidiary RCA, right? So, and then it goes on the Facebook page for the protest. The organizers wrote that the docuseries was an unforgivable investigation into R. Kelly's decades of alleged sexual abuse of young black women and girls, and those in the music industry that have not only enabled him but profited from him, right? So now you have a video of a young lady named Jade Magnus Ogunaki. And she's basically protesting to have R. Kelly muted. I'm going to play this video now, and then I'll come back with the rest of my commentary.
Jade Magnus Ogunaki. I'm the director of organizing at Color of Change. Yeah. In 2017, we led a campaign in partnership with Ultraviolent demanding that RCA drop R. Kelly. We know that R. Kelly is the perpetrator of these horrible sexual acts of sexual violence to young black women and girls for over 25 years. But he did not act alone. He was supported supported by enablers, not only individuals, not only managers, not only people who saw him abusing and violating young black girls for 25 years. He was aided by RCA. He sold 60 million albums in his 25-year-long career. They knew he illegally married an underage Aaliyah.
Knew it.
Yep. They knew he was grooming young black girls as young as 13, 14, and 15 and keeping them in his studio. They knew. And they were okay with it. When the child pornography tape came out and the trial happened, RCA didn't think, maybe we should stop and think about protecting young black girls and women. Instead, they moved forward. In 2017, they put R. Kelly on a national tour. They are okay with it. Recently, just this week, we heard RCA is no longer funding the production for his songs. They're no longer paying for his videos. That is not enough.
Not enough.
In 2017, Sony dropped Dr. Luke for his sexual violence against Kesha. Why don't young black girls and women get that same burden? Why don't young black girls and women get the burden of belief? Why are we not believed when we speak out against acts of sexual violence? Why is it that when an unarmed civilian is killed by the police, the courts are fallible, but when a young black girl comes forward and says she's sexually violated, that's not the case? And all of a sudden the courts are right. It's time for us to come together. We can no longer support R. Kelly, and we can no longer support his corporate enablers. Enough is enough. It is time for us to drop R. Kelly as a culture, as a society, and above all, it's time for RCA to stop putting money in R. Kelly's pocket. Drop R. Kelly.
Okay, so you've heard the video by the young lady, and she's basically trying to get R. Kelly dropped from Sony Records. And the problem with all this is that R. Kelly hasn't been found guilty. And you have all these people, coming out to have his income attacked way before he is indicted, way before he actually goes to trial, right? So if you can remember the sequence of events, basically you have in the Surviving R. Kelly docuseries, and then you have these protesters coming out, going to Sony RCA Records to have R. Kelly dropped, and they're also attacking different streaming services and radio stations to drop R. Kelly from their record labels, or to drop R. Kelly from, to prevent R. Kelly from being played on streaming services and radio stations. So you have all these things, and the problem with this is that it's basically unlawful, right? We're going to look at several different lawful claims that R. Kelly can use to sue the wrongdoers, because essentially, these people, they came out, they attacked his income way before R. Kelly was indicted, way before R. Kelly went to jail. And everyone knows R. Kelly hasn't had a trial. So essentially they're trying to get him, they're trying to punish him in the public without any type of judgment against him. They're trying to punish him and prevent him from generating income. And R. Kelly has several claims of which he can use to actually sue these people, right? So let's just go ahead and get into it. So first we have a civil conspiracy. A civil conspiracy consists of a combination of two or more persons for the purpose of accomplishing by some concerted action either an unlawful purpose or a lawful purpose by unlawful means. The function of a conspiracy claim is to extend liability and tort beyond the active wrongdoer to those who have merely planned, assisted, or encouraged the wrongdoer's acts. So it also says a civil conspiracy is an agreement between two or more persons to injure another by unlawful action. Express agreement among all conspirators is not necessary to find the existence of a civil conspiracy. Each conspirator need not have known all the details of the illegal plan or all the participants involved. All that must be known, or all that must be shown, is that there were a single plan, that the alleged co-conspirators share in the general conspiratorial objective, and that that overt act was committed in furtherance of the conspiracy that caused injury to the complaint. So essentially, this is a law that's used to bring all the parties together so that, or as many parties as possible together, so that they can be sued for their conspiracy. So now, if you take this and you apply it to R. Kelly's situation, you have these protesters that are coming out and then they are basically going to RCA Records and they're putting pressure on RCA Records and streaming agencies, and they're putting pressure on radio stations to have these platforms ban R. Kelly, right? And this is going to affect his income and his means of making money because they're attacking his money. So what this does, we all know, is that the protesters, they're really, in my opinion, just the pawns, right? The people who have to be held accountable or should be held accountable are the people who have essentially planned, a lot of this, right? So when you look at it, it basically says the function of a conspiracy claim is to extend the liability and tort beyond the active wrongdoer, the protesters, to those who have merely planned, assisted, or encouraged the wrongdoer's acts, right? So you want to go after the directors of these organizations who essentially help plan these protests, and who essentially help organize these protests, and possibly any other parties who may have encouraged the people who directed these protests, so on and so forth, right? So the civil conspiracy claim allows you to, or will allow R. Kelly to basically go and get the masterminds behind the conspiracy and actually sue them, because it's going to be pretty difficult to identify every little single protester who has come out to RCA Records to try to stop R. Kelly from getting income. But this is going to allow them to go after the masterminds, essentially, right? So that's one potential claim that could be made. Let me know what you think about R. Kelly suing, the mastermind of the MuteRkelly movement under a civil conspiracy claim. Do you think it will fly? If so, let me know why. If not, let me know why it wouldn't fly. Another claim that R. Kelly can make against the masterminds or the organizations or even possible corporations who were behind the MuteRkelly movement is that he could claim a tortious interference with the contract, right? So the elements of a tortious interference with the contract claim are A, that a valid contract exists, right? We know that a valid contract existed between R. Kelly and Sony. And B, that a third party had knowledge of the contract. We know that the protesters and the organizers of the protests had knowledge of the contract because they're coming out and they're protesting, enforcing, and putting pressure on Sony to have them drop R. Kelly from the label, right? So we know that element is satisfied. And then C, that the third party intentionally and improperly procured the breach of contract. So we know this element exists because the protesters have they have essentially no interest in the actual contract, right? They're not involved in that contract. And what they're doing is that, they're protesting, but they're protesting for the sole purpose of disrupting the contract between R. Kelly as well as the contract between RCA, right? So they're trying to disrupt the contract, and they're using unlawful means to do it, because a lawful mean would be you go to court and you go and get a court judgment, and with that court judgment you basically can break the contract that way. But they don't have a lawful right to do that, and because they don't have a lawful right to do that, they're choosing to disrupt Sony, and they're choosing to disrupt RCA to force them into doing it. It's lawful to protest, but the objective of this protest is unlawful, in my opinion, because you're going to Sony and you're trying to force them to break the contract with R. Kelly, and that is unlawful because number one, R. Kelly has not been found guilty of any crime, and essentially he has a right to have income and he has a valid contract with Sony, and there's no lawful reason for them to essentially come out and disrupt Sony and RCA's business and protest in front of them, right? That's my opinion. There's nothing wrong with protesting, but if you're going to protest, don't, in my opinion, you shouldn't go in front of RCA and you shouldn't go in front of Sony because they essentially have nothing to do with R. Kelly. If you believe R. Kelly is guilty, there's nothing wrong with protesting. There's nothing wrong with coming out on social media. But when you attack his income, that's something totally different. And we know that that a breach resulted in damage to the plaintiff. We know that there's a strong possibility that this element existed because we know that after the protest that RCA essentially dropped R. Kelly. What's uncertain is whether or not R. Kelly agreed to it, right? But either way, if R. Kelly agreed to it because of the pressure or Sony dropped him because of the pressure, then all of these elements are essentially satisfied for the tortious interference with the contract, right? So R. Kelly could sue the organizers of the MuteRkelly movement for their tortious interference of the contract with RCA and any other contracts that he had that they interfered with. There's reports that protesters actually came out to venues where R. Kelly was performing and they basically ruined his performance, right? Another claim that R. Kelly could sue for is tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, right? So this claim is essentially for potential income that R. Kelly could have made, right? So to prevail on a claim for tortious interference with a prospective economic advantage, a plaintiff must prove, one, his reasonable expectation of entering into a valid business relationship. So it's reasonable that R. Kelly could get into business relationships to essentially perform at venues, right? And we know that the protesters have come out and they're trying to get R. Kelly muted, and they're trying to keep people from actually doing business with R. Kelly, right? So any potential business he could have had by performing, making additional record deals, all of that has essentially been quashed now. The second element, the defendant's knowledge of the plaintiff expectancy. The protesters, the MuteRkelly movement, they know that R. Kelly makes money by making songs and by performing, and they have knowledge of that. And not only do they have knowledge of that, they're actually trying to disrupt it intentionally. And then the third element, purposeful interference by the defendants that prevents the plaintiff's legitimate expectancy from ripening into a valid business relationship. So I think the third element is satisfied because, again, they are spamming MuteRkelly, and they are essentially saying that he's guilty of something that he hasn't even gone to court for, and they're trying to prevent potential venues and potential record labels and streaming services from carrying R. Kelly's music, and therefore R. Kelly can't expect to get income from those venues because people are essentially intentionally trying to have these music outlets from basically hosting R. Kelly's music and preventing R. Kelly from performing. It's one thing to protest on Twitter and just say, hey, R. Kelly allegedly did these things, but it's quite another to have a platform dedicated to blocking a person from having income. And this is essentially what MuteRkelly does, right? And then 4, damages to the plaintiff resulting from such interference. And this element is pretty easy to prove because R. Kelly can't go out and make money based on his well-established music career. He can't go out and perform. He can't get residual income from a lot of his music. So this element is fairly easy to prove, right? So that's essentially it for this video. Let me know what you think. Do you think R. Kelly should sue the MuteRkelly movement for torturous interference with prospective economic advantage, for torturous interference with a contract, and for a civil conspiracy? Do you think there's other claims that R. Kelly can make against the MuteRkelly movement? That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and let me know what you think.